Hello, Deanna here, and thanks so much for being here. In today's video, I am going to be doing yet another book review, and the book I will be reviewing is Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. So in honor of the month of July being Jane Austen month, I'm going to go ahead and give a bit of a review and my thoughts on this story. So the story of Pride and Prejudice has been around for quite a while. It is one of the original classics from like the 1800s when Jane Austen wrote it. It is the story of a group of sisters, primarily Elizabeth Bennet is our main protagonist, and her sister Jane Bennet, and we follow these two sisters in their pursuit of love and family and just the going-ons of life in the 1800s, and eventually their romances with the characters Mr. Darcy and Mr. Bingley. So anyone who has heard of Pride and Prejudice would probably think of Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy. That is usually the heart of this story and what most people that may have only heard of it think of. In my thoughts on this one, I came into this very much thinking that it was a romance. I thought that, oh, the story of Pride and Prejudice, that's that romance between Mr. Darcy. Like, I've heard so much about this incredible Mr. Darcy. Oh, Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet. Like, they surpassed any type of interaction I had with this book. I did not read this book until this year of 2022. It's the first time I've ever read Pride and Prejudice. I did not have any exposure to it before then, but yet I had heard all this stuff about Mr. Darcy, how incredible Mr. Darcy was. Like, ooh, Mr. Darcy. So I came into this book very much focused on that this is a romance. And I think that was my first fault coming into this book. I was very much expecting this big romance, and I did not find it. And not to say there's no romance, I'm just saying that was not the central theme of this book. It definitely played a part in this book, and it's definitely an underlying part of this book, but I thought it was going to be this huge romance, and it's more about the actual life of the sisters and just some of the things going on and just life of Elizabeth's world. And even essentially we see that Elizabeth has a cousin who is coming to their home. There's a lot of spending time at people's homes in this book, but part of the story is this cousin who is going to be inheriting the family home when the father, Mr. Bennet, passes away. Now, he's not sick or anything like that, but he is getting older in age. He's got 5 adult daughters, or 5 daughters that are of age, essentially, and it's just getting to that time where what's going to happen in the future. And because this is the 1800s, none of the girls can inherit the house, not even Mrs. Bennet herself, which is Mr. Bennet's wife and the mother of all the girls. She can't even inherit the home. So they're not allowed to own property. And I just thought that was just, going into books that are written in the 1800s, that life is going to be different. But sometimes when you're reading it from an author who was living in that time, especially a female author writing about fairly strong female characters, and they can't even own a home, they're not allowed to inherit their family home, and just what impact that has on their life and their choices, that was the big part of this book. So the romance is necessary, because if not, the girls would be on the street and destitute. So they have to get married, essentially, in order to have some type of prospects in the future and actually be secure and safe. So it was a little hard sometimes reading that and just thinking of what life was like and the limitations that women had on them back in the 1800s. Now this book as well, you'll even see a few tabs where I had stopped reading for a bit or something, because this being a book written in the 1800s, language was a lot different back then. The way that individuals spoke, the way that sentence structure even was, and just the flowy prose of the language and how flowery it was. Sometimes it was hard reading this book. Sometimes it was hard interpreting exactly what's being said, and I did find myself sometimes just struggling, because this is not a book to just throw on. At least when I was reading it, for me personally, this wasn't something that was just like, oh, I'm gonna breeze through a couple chapters. Like, no, these chapters were fairly short in here, but it would take me some time just to get through it, because it's just so much I would have to turn my brain on to be like, what am I reading? What did I just read? What is going on with this story? It's very much one where I had to take some time to think about it, and then I learned while reading it that it's actually a satire. So it's not really a romance. It's not really just about a story about some sisters and losing their home and things like that. It's actually a commentary a bit on the silliness of just the interactions of people and the pride and prejudice that people have. Like, literally in the title, it's about the pride that they carry around with them and how prejudiced they are and how much they judge others. And there's a bit of that satire throughout it and how they kind of joke and tease each other. So I didn't realize that sometimes when they were talking to each other, they were actually poking fun at each other. So it made me kind of rethink how I was reading this, and it made me see it from a different perspective when I realized this isn't a big romance, and it's actually more of a satire and more of like a opinion piece almost, or a bit of Jane's thoughts on life and just her kind of poking at the way that life was back then. I want to say when I really actually got into this book was right about where my marker is here. Once I got about here, which is funny because this is actually one that's July, but we're in June still here, but it's fitting for July. Once I got to about chapter 50, all of this breezed through, like super quick. Like, considering how long it took me to like just even get like through like a little bit of this, the last part breezed through. Because I felt much more invested, the action had picked up, I felt there was a lot more dialogue going on, it was just a lot more of showing happening instead of how much telling was in the story. I was not expecting so much telling in this story. There is a scene where they have a ball, and instead of showing us how Mr. Darcy was in one of the scenes, we instead learn through a dialogue between them recapping what happened between like the Elizabeth and her mom and some of the sisters and some family friends. They then point out that Mr. Darcy was kind of standoffish because he sat beside Elizabeth and wouldn't talk to her. So instead of actually showing us that scene, they then told us that scene. So I did find there was a lot of telling, and there was a lot of descriptors and things where I was just like, okay, let's get back to what's actually happening in this story. So that made it a little bit more difficult to read this as well. Having said all that though, I then watched the 2005 Pride and Prejudice movie starring Keira Knightley. Absolutely love Keira Knightley, been a fan of her since Pirates in the Caribbean. Love, love, love her. And I had never seen the Pride and Prejudice movie from 2005. Loved it, absolutely loved it. After spending time to watch that movie, now it actually like makes me love this book that much more, and it makes me actually want to go back and read it kind of with them in mind, or just knowing kind of more of what happened, because I just gotta say, sometimes reading this, like I said, it was a little difficult to get through. I loved some of the characters. Mrs. Bennet as your comic relief was absolutely hilarious. Some of the things that she said, or just how she was with the girls sometimes, and how everything was a big disaster to her. But then sometimes I really understood where she was coming from, because yes, she was shown as like, oh my god, everything is huge to her, and she's almost this over-exaggerated caricature of a person. She's also really worried about her daughters. Like, she's got 5 daughters that she knows are going to be essentially out on the street if something were to happen to her husband, gosh forbid, and they would have nowhere to go. So she wants to see the best for them. She wants to make sure that they are living a good life. And yes, maybe sometimes she's a little pushy and her actions maybe aren't always the best because she's a little manipulative and she is trying to make it her way. So yes, she's definitely got her flaws and she's not an amazing character, but I did see where she was coming from, in that she was just trying to get the best for her daughters, to make sure that her daughters were taken care of in a time when they relied so heavily on men and marriages, and that was how they were taken care of. So yes, not ideal, but understandable in a lot of ways. I also really loved Mr. Bingley. I didn't know much about Mr. Bingley going into this, didn't hear about him through what you would hear about Pride and Prejudice, didn't know much about the characters or anything other than Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy. So then seeing Mr. Bingley and his relationship with Jane, I just thought that was so sweet, and I thought he was a wonderful little character that was a little too easily swayed sometimes by Mr. Darcy. But it's just because he always meant the best for others, and he became one of my most favorite characters. Him and Mr. Bennet. I loved Mr. Bennet too, especially like how he was with Elizabeth, and just Elizabeth is such a fiery, passionate woman. She's very headstrong. She's very opinionated. She's got that sharp tongue of hers. She doesn't always, mind her P's and Q's sometimes, and to have Mr. Bennet look at her so fondly and just really care about her, it just really warmed me to Mr. Bennet, because he appreciated this wonderful, strong daughter that he had and just wanted the best for her. I will say the character of the cousin, Mr. Collins, infuriated me so many times. Some of the things he would say, like there's a scene where we have the youngest daughter, Lydia, or the second youngest, I believe she's the youngest, has run away from the family. Big scandal, huge scandal back in the 1800s that would barely bat an eye now. And she ran away. And she ran away with a man. And Mr. Collins' comment is, I would rather have my daughter dead than do what she did, or something along that lines. I was just like, dude, really? Like, I know it's the times and everything, but you're gonna wish death on your daughter instead of her being off. Yeah, she's being silly and maybe that's dishonor on the family, but you're gonna rather her dead? Dude, priorities. Clearly. But that's just a sign of the times. It's very much the sign of the times for Pride and Prejudice. I had done a whole vlog on reading this, and I have hours and hours of footage where I went through and I had stopped and commentate. Fortunately, it's just corrupted in a way that I cannot edit it properly. I can't actually get it into my editing software to actually make a video of it. So that's why I thought I'd just do this video instead. So this is a bit of some of my thoughts, all kind of just compiled to say what I was thinking. I would go through and really give you more info, but honestly, my main thoughts on this is that I'm really glad I read it. I'm glad I had this experience. I'm glad I now can say I've read this book, because there is a part of me that very much enjoyed this book to the point that I want to go back and read more of it. I want to go back and read it again and read it with a new perspective, a new kind of way of thinking, because it was halfway through the book that my perspective on it changed, and that's probably why this bit here flew by so much, because it was after getting a bit of perspective and sitting back and going, that's what this book is, that it really made it click more for me. So I'd love to go through and read it again with a different mindset, because then maybe I'll have a different opinion on it that I'll come back with and be able to do a bit more of a more in-depth review on all of my thoughts. Because though this is marked up a little bit and there's some markings here and there, I would love to just get in and do a full deep dive on this. So that is going to be part of my goal, is to do a full huge deep dive, really get in there and really critique this book and annotate it, because I've gotten really into annotating lately, and I want to do that with this book to give it more of my thoughts and really be able to come back with an analysis on this book. So that is my plan, and I hope to do that very soon. It would be great if I could do it in the month of July, though I'm juggling some other things, but if not, I'll do it in the next coming months. But that's going to be it for me. I just wanted to kind of give some of my thoughts on this book, and keep an eye out, because I hopefully will be back to give more deep dive thoughts on Pride and Prejudice. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, give it a like. I appreciate it, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, night, evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. Thank you so much for being here. Take care of yourselves, and you will see me next time. Bye!